Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are continuing our study of the Olivet Discourse. Is it divided into two different discussions, i.e., the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 and then the end of time? The majority of commentators, with the exception of the dispensationalists, take the position that when Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple and the city, of course, that the apostles were so stunned they could not imagine such a thing happening. And so they asked him, tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And we are told by the great majority of commentators that at this point the apostles were totally confused. They were just ignorant. They wrongly, confusedly, and ignorantly conflated the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple with the end of the age and the coming of the Lord. Well, I suggest to you that the apostles understood things just a whole lot better than most Bible commentaries today. They had a pretty good idea, based upon Jesus' own words prior to Matthew 24, that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. Matthew 21, Matthew chapter 22, Matthew 16. So they were not nearly as ignorant as commentators today would like to imagine. So here's the deal. If it can be demonstrated that the Olivet Discourse is not divided into two subjects, if it can be shown that Matthew 24, verse 36, but of that day and hour knows no man, is not a break in the discussion between AD 70 and the so-called imaginary end of the world, then all futurist eschatologies are essentially falsified. They just go away. Because the Olivet Discourse is the foundation and the fountain for all futurist eschatology. So, I've been sharing with you thoughts on the parable of the absent master, Matthew 25:14 and following. A man was going to go away into a far country. He gathered his servants, he gave gifts to them, and he told them to occupy those gifts until he returned. And I've been sharing with you that this motif of the absent master is really the foundation for all New Testament predictions of the return of the Lord. Everyone agrees, Acts chapter 1, Jesus going into a far country, right? He was going to a far country, there to receive a kingdom. Acts chapter 2 tells us he was receiving the kingdom. Matter of fact, Acts chapter 13, 30 and following says, he, that is Yahweh, has given to him, that is Jesus, the sure mercies of David. Well, the sure mercies of David is nothing else than the kingdom. It's the throne of David. So, Acts 1 is the departure of the absent master, of the master. And all of these passages in the New Testament, which speak of the coming of the Lord, speak of, guess what? The return of the absent master. Now, I've already shown you in Matthew chapter 21 that the absent vineyard owner was the Lord coming at the time of the vindication of the martyrs to destroy the wicked husbandman. Well, do we have more than one departure? No. If we don't have more than one departure, then where do we get the idea of many comings in judgment? Where do we delineate between the coming of the Master in Matthew 21, 33 and following, to destroy those wicked husbandmen, to vindicate the suffering, the martyrdom of the servants and the Son, and some other coming of the Lord at the so-called end of time? Where do we delineate that? Okay, I've been sharing with you, I began a look at Acts chapter 3. Listen, Acts chapter 3 is very often considered by futurists those who believe in a yet future return of the absent master, as absolute definitive proof. I mean, after all, here is Peter predicting Christ to come at the restoration of all things. Now, let me reiterate something that I shared with you yesterday. That doctrine of the restoration of all things, needless to say, is intensely eschatological. It can be considered a comprehensive term for the totality of eschatological fulfillment. Unfortunately, many people believe that the restoration begins at the second coming. But that's not accurate. John, as Elijah, was to come and to restore all things. That's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 17, 10 through 12. So if John was Elijah, whose task it was to restore, and by the way, the word that is used there in Matthew chapter 17 for restore is a form of the identical word in Acts chapter 3 for the restoration of all things. Okay? So it's not like these are two radically different restorations. But as I shared with you yesterday, the restoration work of John the Baptizer had nothing to do with the restoration of material creation. You know, on Facebook, I've been in conversations with individuals, futurists, over the last couple of years, and they've told me that when Christ comes, material creation is going to be restored. And I have asked them, does that mean that bugs, slugs, and mosquitoes are going to be declared to be sons of God? Well, evidently, according to them, that's the truth. But according to Scripture, it's not. But here's the point. The real point is, John would initiate the restoration. Christ's coming, the return of the absent master, would consummate that coming. It would not initiate that restoration. Now, today, and I promise you, we're going to get to what I did promise. I said that I'm going to prove to you that the restoration of all things, the return of the absent master, would be at the end of the Old Covenant world of Israel. I'm going to do that, but I want to focus this morning on something that is so clear, so undeniable, so explicit, right here in Acts chapter 3. And a little bit of a backstory very quickly. I was raised in the amillennial perspective of eschatology. A foundational belief that I held to, that I preached, was that God was through with Israel at the cross. The Old Testament in its entirety, insofar as applicability of law, insofar as prophecy, insofar as everything, was fulfilled, annulled, and abrogated at the cross. Now, if you've been paying attention, you know that, well, that's not it. But anyway, here it is. I have been and am reviewing and refuting a book by Mr. Kyle Pope. In this book, Mr. Pope says if a law or a covenant has been annulled, it's no longer applicable. Well, that's absolutely axiomatic and true. And Mr. Pope believes that the Old Testament is a reference to the entirety of the Old Testament. He refers to Deuteronomy as part of the Old Testament, which of course is undeniable. Now, I'm saying all that to say this. Years and years and years ago, I was sitting in my office studying, reading, contemplating, and I was reading Acts chapter 24, 13 and following, where Paul on trial said, "This I confess to you, that after the way they call heresy, so will I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things that are written in the law and the prophets, that there is about to be the resurrection of the just and the unjust." And I was like, wait a minute. If the old law, the Old Testament, was nailed to the cross and thus no longer applicable, how could Paul, speaking years after the cross, be saying that he was looking for the fulfillment of Moses, the law, and the prophets? I got to tell you, folks, that hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no explanation. And I know attempts are made to delineate between the law versus the prophets. Well, I'm sorry, there is no such delineation in Scripture. According to Jesus in Matthew chapter 11:13, all of the prophets and the law prophesied until John. Did you catch the power of that? The law prophesied. Now, how did the law prophesy? Okay? Ask yourself the question. How did the law prophesy? It prophesied because in the feast days of the law, and does anybody doubt that the feast days were an integral, foundational, fundamental element, part of, and a massive part of the law? I mean, after all, Leviticus chapter 23, and I think everyone would agree that Leviticus is part of the law. Just like Numbers chapter 28, I think everyone agrees that Numbers is the law. And Numbers 28 goes through the feast days and the sacrifices for the feast days. So here's the point. Paul said that the feast days were types and shadows. They foretold, they prophesied of the good things to come. The Jews understand that the law was prophetic, and thus there absolutely is no delineation, no dichotomization between the law and the prophets. The law prophesied, oh, and by the way, the prophets were considered the law. I'm not going into that, but here's the point. I think you see it. I think you see the train coming. If the law prophesied, if prophecy was an integral part of the law, then when Jesus said, not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from the law, and technically, because of the elliptical nature of the text, it is technically not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from the law or the prophets until it is all fulfilled. Now keep that text in mind as we conclude here in Acts chapter 3. And no, we're not through with Acts 3. I've got to show you it would be fulfilled at the end of the law. What I'm about to say drives that point home, but it's not the point I'm headed toward. So in Acts chapter 3, speaking of Christ and his return, the return of the absent master, it says, whom the heavens must receive until the times of restoration, the word restoration there, apokatastasis. Until the times of the restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began. Okay, the law prophesied, and catch this, the law prophesied of the judgment, the coming of the Lord, and the resurrection. If you say those things have not been fulfilled, then the law has not been fulfilled. Furthermore, Israel's feast days are not fulfilled, and if the feast days are not fulfilled, the sacrifices are still valid and binding and effective. Here is Peter, in the clearest words possible, saying his eschatological hope was the hope of the fulfillment of the Old Testament promises of the coming of the absent master. So if you say that the return of the absent master of Acts chapter 1, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 Thessalonians 4, if you say that's still future, then the law, every jot, and every tittle remains binding, valid, and imposed. But you see, this passage proves that the coming of the Lord, the judgment, and the resurrection would be at the consummation of those Old Testament prophets. In other words, at the end of the Old Covenant, to bring it to its close. And I'm out of time. Listen, do yourself a favor. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and order the book, Elijah Has Come, a solution to Romans 11, 25 to 27. I think you'll be absolutely blown away at how important John the Baptizer was as Elijah in regard to the entire eschatological narrative. Do yourself a favor, go there and order the book. Send me a note that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. Hey, out of time. Thanks for joining me this Tuesday. I will see you on the flip side.